some chanting, a little bit of music. And the subject is about as broad as it can be, which is walking the path of the Master. We haven't even said which Master, so it just gives us about as much latitude as we want. I'll talk a little, we'll have a little chanting. We have a couple of really good singers from the U.S. in here, and we'll get them to perform, at least one of them, if not both of them. And I'll talk a little bit, and we'll have question and answer, and whatever we feel like doing. We don't have a real
You also
plan
check
for
the
this.
camera.
What's that?
Nothing.
Nothing.
But you were
Check
making,
talk.
you were interpreting me in sign language.
There you go. All we need.
So why don't we start with the prayer, and then we'll have a little chanting. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend,
Friend.
Beloved God,
Friend, beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Beloved Guru,
Beloved Guru,
Paramhansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
Saints of all religions,
Saints of all religions,
dear friend Swami Kriyananda,
dear friend Swami Yogananda,
humbly we bow to you all.
humbly bow to you.
Help us to feel your presence,
Help us to feel your presence,
guiding our thoughts,
guiding our thoughts,
opening our hearts,
opening our hearts,
making us ever aware
making us ever aware
of your constant loving presence.
of your constant loving presence.
We are your children.
We are your children.
Guide us and bless us.
Guide us and bless us.
Oh. Okay, let's do a couple of chants. That'll be fun. Excuse me, how long should we run tonight?
8:15, 30.
When we are done chanting, you're going to need this for the camera.
Okay.
Yoga
Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. He knows whom you let go. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. In the thought my love brought, in the thought my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. He knows whom you let go. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I see. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I see. In the thought my love brought, in the thought my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. He knows whom you let go. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing. Thou art my life, thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I will sing.
Let's have a few minutes of meditation, just centering ourselves in an open-hearted, open-minded way. That whatever divine inspiration is possible for us, that we may receive it.
Om peace. Amen. It's very interesting, and everybody knows this. This will sound like a cliche, to travel and go to cultures that aren't the same as your own, languages that aren't the same as your own. You're first, wherever you start. Once you factor in reincarnation, it's kind of hard to know what really belongs to you. And right now, when the world is just such a mixed up story, that everybody's everywhere, and Master said, a lot of people who are more in their spirit Indian are being born in the West so that they can bring all those teachings there, and a lot of people who are more traditionally Western, even American, you're being born in India. I was completely charmed many years ago when we were traveling as tourists and pilgrims to Varanasi, which is where I was also just a few days ago. And our local guide was a man named Ram, who was exceedingly proud of his culture and his city in a very nice way. And over the course of many years, we became friends. He had 5 daughters, and then finally the 6th was a son. All 5 of the daughters and his wife and him were very, very traditional Hindus. They followed the rituals and they looked that way. The son, I think he was from New York, even though he was born to them. They were all very short. He was about 6'2". And the business he went into right away was cell phones at a time when cell phones had hardly just started. Whatever his name was, it meant the jewel of the family. But it was just, you just looked at them and you thought, 7 people who've been in this culture for a long time, and where this, they say that the cuckoo bird just deposits its egg in the nest and then flies away. And then just leaves that egg to, so every so often you meet a cuckoo. This man was a cuckoo egg. He was a perfectly nice man, lovely man, in fact. And I think he took care of all 7 of those people. But nonetheless, it was just like, God, what are you doing here? Because things that have been traditional and true for generations and generations are just ending every day. Recently, we were having that conversation that everybody is having about artificial intelligence and how all these highly skilled professions that people are going to expensive universities to learn in another 10 years just may not exist. I mean, I remember when this dear family who ran the film developing shop, just completely vaporized because of digital cameras all of a sudden. So we are not living in times where we can comfortably just do what we've always done and think that it's going to work. I have the unusual privilege being in a community and having been in the same community for 50 years now, that I have multi-generational friendships. So I know what the kids are actually doing. And I'm always a little moral dilemma when I talk to the parents and they tell me what they think their children are doing. And everybody's a good person. It's not like people are way off the rails. It's just that the past is no indication of the future. And that is not easy for the human mind to accept. Especially when you start building families, building, expectations for your children, or you as a grandparent or a parent have expectations for your grandchildren. And we tend to think that the past is an indication of the future because in other yuga periods than the one we're in, there is some reality. But once you start on an ascending age, which is with the yuga cycles, I'm going to make the picture. This is 500 AD. This is 1700, where Sri Yukteswar said it began to shrink, 1900, where it really shifted, and then us, about here, which means that we're constantly expanding our capacity to perceive reality. And what people say that is being invented, it's not really being invented. I mean, the realities were always there. It's just being noticed. Swami Kriyananda's father was an oil geologist, and he was sent to Romania, which is where Swamiji was born. Oil in Romania had been seeping out of the ground forever, but nobody knew what to do with it until Rockefeller and Standard Oil sent Ray Walters over there to tell the Romanians what to do with it, among others. It wasn't like it didn't exist. Nobody conceived of what it could do. And that's the world we're living in now, where people are conceiving of things that they never conceived of before. And it's, on one hand, it is extraordinarily fun. I wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't have the airplanes. I wouldn't be talking into this camera, where there may in fact be living humans on the other side, or else it'll eventually go on YouTube, which we now just say like that's an actual word, and people all over the world will see it, by tomorrow morning. We just take all that, that's just the world that we're living in. But it wasn't yesterday. And what will happen tomorrow? So now we add into this that, as the Gita promises, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, and it is my humble opinion that virtue has super declined and vice is really predominating, that I, the Lord, take visible form to restore Dharma, to save my children from, from it, all of it. And so Yogananda speaks of that, and Master speaks not just of his own incarnation, but he backs it up to Jesus and Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya and Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda, and then Swami Kriyananda, and then Narayani, Shurjo, and I'll name every person in this room. There's something completely different happening now. And it's not Hinduism, and it's not Christianity. It's the Lord taking visible form to restore a new reality. So we have a choice as to how we want to participate in this. We can, there's a phrase that I've grown to dislike intensely. We can just get Kriya, as if we were going shopping. I'll have a few asparagus, a little Kriya, some zucchini over here. I'm advocating become a Kriyaban, which I think is a more elegant and more accurate way to say it. It's more open-ended than merely getting something. But we can simply, learn a few things, get a few techniques, there I said it, learn a few techniques, and just figure that we're done. This is what I came for, this will help me for self-realization. But that whole way of thinking is part of the past, not the future. Because the past has told us, if you do this, in the Catholic world, it's if you go to Mass, if you do this sort of thing. In the Jewish world where I grew up, I think you do mitzvahs. If you do enough good things and are an ethical person, and in the culture that you all live in, or at least the Hindu part of it, you can pay the pujari, and he'll just do it for you, But that's the past, that's not the future. And what Master came and made what I think is just a remarkably radical statement, where he said, the only place that God can be experienced is in the human nervous system. I object to that because the poetry is so awful. You start with that wonderful phrase, the only place that God can be experienced, and you really expect something more from that one. And then it lands in the human nervous system. But I think it's helpful because, at least for me, it's shocking. It just to realize that we're just carrying it within us. And all of our ideas that it's something outside, that some institution can do, that a priest can do for you, that if you just follow these certain rules, you'll be saved, that's the past, that's not the future. We came out of an age of form, we're going into an age of energy. And what that means is it just either is or it isn't. You can't just make it look right. It has to actually be who we really are. Now, this is the really good news, because it puts our salvation in the only place where it really can be put, which is right into our own hands, right into a nervous system, but right into the decisions that we personally make. And so, we get drawn to this path, or I think almost all of you, or all of you in this room at least, are somewhat associated or deeply associated, or whatever path you're following. But, in this path, Master, and then Swamiji through him afterwards, which is a role, Swamiji plays this role. He's the next generation for Master. We know of several incarnations when Master was a king and Swami was even his actual son, or in this lifetime where he was his spiritual son. And he just takes this great, what Swami called Master, he said he was like a meteor streaking across the heavens. He said it was just such a powerful light, and it just went across the sky like that. And then Swami's job was to sort of pull it down, so that all of us could actually figure out what we were supposed to do about it. Because you can be profoundly inspired by something, but what are you going to do about it? For me personally, I had understood the idea of self-realization through the teachings of Vivekananda and Ramakrishna for about 3 years. I met that when I was 19. I met Swami when I was 22. And during those 3 years, I studied self-realization, but mostly I started reading the lives of saints. And at that time, there was a metaphysical bookstore, which, interestingly, a few decades later, Ananda itself bought. But at that time, it was just this wonderful store that was impersonal to me. And I just started reading through the saints and the yogis and the Christian missionaries. I just read anybody who had actually tried to live differently. Because it was one thing to think differently, even to believe differently. It was quite another thing to live differently, and I just couldn't figure out how to do it. But it didn't help. You get some Protestant minister who believes that Jesus Christ is the only Savior. I have to say, some of those missionaries had extraordinary courage in what they did. So whether I like their theology or not, just the power that belief gave them, they were heroic in ways that were breathtaking to me. But I was raised a Jew, and I don't believe that Jesus is the only Savior, so being a Christian missionary was not an option. You could be a Catholic nun and check that one off for a lot of the same reasons. I couldn't do that. You could be a naked sadhu up in the Himalayas. I had a lot of reasons why I wasn't going to do that. But there was none that actually related to the fact that at that time, I was living in San Francisco by then, or maybe still in Palo Alto. I had a job with a law firm. Not that I wasn't a lawyer. I have no professional training. I was a secretary there, although that one was fun because I found Valmiki's 1,000-page Ramayana. This is when I was about 20. In San Francisco, and where I lived to where my office was, Geary Avenue, one of the main streets there, I got on the Geary Express bus and I'd write it down and get off and go to my office. And I was reading the Ramayana like this. And I'd never encountered anything like this. And then Sita was abducted by Ravana, and Rama doesn't know where she is. And is she going to be saved? What's going to happen? And everybody on the bus was just as relaxed as they could be. And I would look at them and I would think, don't you know Sita's been captured? I was just totally lost in this story. I was working in that place, they had a machine that was like the precursor of a word, what do you call it? No, not mimeograph. Computer. Word processor, that's the word I was looking for. It was a precursor to that. This was a very sophisticated law firm, a very nice law firm. And my job was to run the machine. And when you didn't have any work, they let you just read. So I read the Ramayana to and from work and in my office when I didn't have work. It took me 3 months to read the whole thing because that was the only time I read it. At the end of 3 months, when I thought I was going to get a raise, instead I got fired. So just about the time we got seat to back, I was out of that job. But anyway, there we are, all of that. Interestingly, I got fired from that job. I don't know how to say this in a more delicate way, because I didn't give a damn. And somehow the personnel director sensed that. And what was so remarkable to me was, but of course I don't care about this job. I'm trying to find self-realization. Why would I care about this job? Now, of course, I grew up a lot after that. In fact, I was in charge of the publishing company at Ananda Village at some point. I did a terrible job. I have no talent for business. But anyway, I was in charge of it for a while. And I had a few people on my staff who didn't give a damn. And I actually wrote a letter to that personnel director. Oh, I understand why you fired me. I was plenty smart, but I didn't care. And now, all of a sudden, I was doing something where I really cared. Okay? Because I met Swami, and it was thrilling to me. First of all, I saw personified what I'd been reading about in all these books. Somebody who just really was living the principles. And I don't know how I knew all of that, but I did, just the moment I saw him. And he had a community. And I mean, it took me approximately a minute to make the decision that this is what I was going to do. But I went there for myself. I wanted to help people. That was part of my problem in life. I really wanted to help people, but I was such a dum-dum. I didn't have anything to give them. What could I give people? My desire to know something, but not knowing anything? I just didn't have anything that I could believe in or care about. But still, even after I found Swamiji, and even after I went to live in that community, I was still just in it for myself. I didn't look terribly selfish. I was working hard. I was cooking for everybody. It was fun. But I always did what I thought was fun. That was basically my principle. I went to work one morning. I walked over the hill with my friend Seva to go to the office where we worked, the publications business. We arrived close to the building. She went directly in about 8:30 in the morning. But I kept recalibrating and meeting things that were more fun and didn't actually get to the office till 4 in the afternoon. At which point my dear friend Seva, mentor and friend, who was a woman of few words, but got her point across, said, "Good morning, Asha." Which communicated quite a lot. But it took me a while. Okay, I love Swamiji, of course. I soon became involved in his life. At that time he was there. You could make tea for him. You could fix dinner. You could do his laundry. You could iron his shirts. You could do all the sort of chela things that you think about doing. And I was doing all of that. And I really appreciated the opportunity of living in that community, being out of the city, just all the things that were good about it. And then one day I realized that everything that I was able to do and loved was because Swamiji was working so hard to manifest it. Books to read, classes to be able to go to, and in that case, even a place to live, wonderful friends, all of this. Because Swami was just pouring his lifeblood into making it happen. And it crossed my mind that maybe I should really help him, because he was really helping me, and it's not really good to just take, is it? Even though I was taking for the sake of my self-realization, but the emphasis was on self and not so great on realization. And I just really realized, and Swami had talked about this, Master talks about that, this, the purest kind of love is friendship, he said. The purest kind of relationship is friendship. He says every other kind of relationship, no matter how generous-hearted it is, has an element of compulsion, was the phrase he used. You know, you marry someone, they become your wife or your husband, you give birth to a child, the child won't live unless you take care of it. You know, just all of these different ways. It doesn't mean that it necessarily is selfish. It just means that there's a point where you just have to do it. But friendship is freely given. And when Swami even started the monastery back in the 1970s, which didn't last, well, it lasted 10 or 12 years, that was a good run. He called it the Friends of God, which I honestly, at the time, I never understood. It just seemed a little odd. But later, when he was talking about this, and there's somewhere in the Gita where Krishna calls Arjuna friend, and Swami writes about that, about what an elevated relationship that was, because of the way Jesus puts it. Jesus says to his disciples toward the end, "You call me master," and then he says, "And it's right that you should." He was not going, no false modesty here. He said, "But I call you friend," because a friend embraces as his own whatever it is that his friend is trying to do. And Swami has talked about this in many different places, just about rising to that level where the cause of the master is our own cause, that we actually care, not just in an abstract way, but in a very deep part of our heart, that if I'm going to take the grace and the teaching and the kriya and the friendship and the opportunity and the countless other things that being a disciple or a devotee of this path, what am I going to give back that will really matter? You know? And why would I want to do that? Do I really care? And these are not questions, there's no dogmatic answers to any Ananda question. People ask questions and they so often want, you know, something that won't wiggle, that'll just sit there. And that's what the past is about. I love, well, the Catholic Church, I don't mean to point fingers at them all the time, but you know, you start being very specific about things and there's no place to stop. I actually once, when we were in litigation with a master's other organization, there was a point where there was a piece of literature that they'd put out that said something like, you know, the masters bless those who are members. I think it even said in good standing or something like that. And I thought, well, did the master not bless you before you got old enough to have, you know, the lessons? And how many installments of payment can you miss before the master's blessings are withdrawn? Which is to say, all I'm saying is, you can't, those are forms, you know? Swamiji says, as soon as you tell people this is what you have to do for salvation, then you actually want to know, well, what is the least that I can do? How much can I get away with? If it's cut and dried like that. But that's the past, that's not the future. The future is, who am I really? And the other side of that is that it isn't just that I do this and this and this and this. It's, who am I inside of myself and what is really important to me? I remember I was sitting in my living room one day. I don't even know the context, because the house I live in is sort of a community house, so I don't really sit in the living room. I sit in my own room, but I was just sitting there. There was this, at that time there was this big picture of Master on the wall, and I was just staring at the picture. And all of a sudden, I just realized I was born for this, just like that. I was born for this. I remember traveling to India on my own. I think it was the first time I traveled by myself. I went on a Korean airline, Asiana, I think, airline. We stopped in South Korea, and I had like a 3-hour layover or something before the next round of the flight. And because I can be a little catastrophe oriented, I started thinking, what if the world ends right now and I just have to spend the rest of my incarnation in South Korea? What would I do? And of course, the biggest problem is I don't speak Korean, so I would have to learn Korean. And then I thought of all the immigrants in the US where you see, medical doctors from other countries who are cleaning hotel rooms because they don't speak the language and they haven't gotten established. So I figured I'd go. I didn't actually think that if the whole world has ended, their hotels are not going to be real busy. But, but in any case, I thought I'd just go clean hotel rooms and I would learn Korean. And then when I got good enough at Korean, I would open an Ananda center. And it was just sort of one of those vague, sort of daydreams that you have sometimes, especially when you're, on long airplane trips. But I have to honestly say, I was so pleased with myself. I was just so pleased to find out what my heart would do if it was just left on its own. So what I'm actually saying here is, don't worry about what you look like. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. And I can urge you to do lots of things that would be very helpful to Master's work. But you have to start with yourself. You have to start with yourself and actually ask the question. If I were stuck in a country where I didn't speak the language and I had to spend the rest of my life there, what would I actually do? Who am I? And if the answers don't please you, then that's when we have to really start working. And if one comes to a strong feeling about, of gratitude and appreciation and the natural desire, as Swami put it, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. It's much more, the first thing we do when we find something we love is tell somebody about it, isn't it? Well, nowadays you just take a picture of it, and even while you're doing it, everybody's watching you do it. Why do we do that? We do that because it's more fun. And what if you feel that you have found something that changes your life forever? What do you want to do about that? And it's your time, your money, your heart, your talent. How do we use it? And everybody, has their own way. But one of the things that Master has done for us is he's brought us together. To be brothers and sisters to each other. And this world, especially this country, is very complicated. You start with the traffic. We've changed the word slightly to desire, my great enemy. Geography, my great enemy. But the human heart has no limit. So if we're going to walk in the footsteps of the Master, we have to ask, where is he going? And how can I be his friend? Not just his student, not just the one who gets Kriya and goes home and practices it, which is good, I'm not against it. Become a Kriyaban, which is a little bit more like, more dynamic, right? But how can I then be a friend to the one who's been such a friend to me? And it's a very personal answer, but do ask the question. Do ask the question. I often think of my life review. I've always been a little infatuated by dying, but about death and life review and all of that. I love to think about my life review. I just love to think about, being with the Masters or their appointed representative, whoever that might be on the occasion, and just looking back over it. and just see whether or not I can stand in how I've lived. And if we haven't, if we can't, then maybe we should think about it. You know, what can I do so that I have what people might think is a bit of a morbid phrase, but I like to sort of store up enough that I can die on this. I can rest on these laurels. I can face the masters from this point. And if I can't, what can I do to make that more true? These are wonderful meditations and lead to wonderful ideas for the best way to live our lives. Okay, my friends. Duty, maybe Biraj, Sergio, could you sing Cloisters for us? Maybe, or lead people in singing it?
You can have questions
Yes.
later if you want.
Yeah. As soon as we have the song, I'll invite you to ask a few questions. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you need this?
I think we'll manage with one.
Okay.
There's only two parts. Cloisters.
Yes, the woman just said no part after we do it once. And then it's we would go to the
You do the harmony.
we do the harmony.
Okay. Long. Is that the
So twice through, first time in unison.
Long I've called you, my Lord, long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sight. Bathe the darkness with tears of devotion. Offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come? Long I've called you, my Lord, long I've called you. Many years I have longed for your sight. Bathe the darkness with tears of devotion. Offered candles in prayer to your light. How much longer, friend, must I cry your name? I am yours, ever yours. Will you come?
Is there another song you can do just standing there?
What do you want?
Lord Most High, maybe, since we're just doing those? Yeah.
And does the men go?
Yeah, you guys get to do the harmony this time. Unison first.
Men? Are the men going first? first, or everyone?
Okay,
Oh.
men,
It's just-
women, and together
Okay,
in harmony. Yes.
Lord.
Lord.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasures, all our melody.
Make us each a channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share thy love.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? We could take a few questions before we call it an evening. Yes.
So, Master, of course, had his master in flesh.
Right.
Swamiji had
His
was
master.
in the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
We are a little bit in uncharted territory, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And at least I'm not competent enough to really attune to him. So if I have questions, how do you actually make that journey? You know, how do you
Right.
bridge that gap?
Right.
If I can-
First, the question is basically, so many of the great stories involve a disciple being with a master incarnated, or with a great disciple, as we were with Swami. What if you're not? What if there's nobody embodied around you that you feel that way toward? Here's something interesting that I thought about at one point. The avatar's return, Master tells us about a number of his previous incarnations. But there's a lot of space between those incarnations, sometimes centuries and centuries. So, and whereas the avatar is totally free and chooses his incarnation according to the will of God, nothing to do with his own karma. I'm going to sneeze. We've been fortunate. Somehow I got something allergic inside of me. You're lucky. I've been sneezing like a crazy person all day. But we are compelled to incarnate much more frequently because of the unresolved vrittis that we have going on within us. So if every time we incarnate, we demand that there be a guru in the flesh for us to relate to, we're going to be switching around about every 60 or 70 years, right? And we're bound to have to choose lesser teachers, because what if there doesn't happen to be the cycle when there's a really great teacher or great disciple? Whereas we talk about the relationship with the Master running over many incarnations. And so are we going to be so fickle as to say that because you're not here with me, you're out, and I'll just take anybody who happens to be walking around in a body right now? I mean, everybody just says this as if this were like an obvious thing. Of course, I want somebody in the body to guide me, but we're not thinking it through. This is a great problem on the spiritual path, is we just get some idea in our head. This is what I was saying about the past and the future, and we don't actually think it through to the end. So also, if you believe that time and space and death is no obstacle for a God-realized soul, then the mere fact that they're not with you is not saying that they can't guide you. Now, one could also say, I'm not very good at getting that guidance, but that's an entirely different problem than the problem of whether or not the Master is incarnated. And the calm assumption that if he had a physical body I could see, then I would listen to him, is perhaps a convenient myth. I won't say for sure, but it might be, just like I would do it if. I mean, there's lots of times we say, oh, well, of course, I would be very dedicated if. I would be very generous if. I would be very attuned if. But if we also accept that God and Guru know what they're doing with us, you would not be in an incarnation. No circumstance of your life could be other than it is exactly meant to be. And if you just look around the room, you're not alone here. You're not out on some desert island with no resources and just trying to make it up all by yourself. You're surrounded by Guru Bhais, some of whom have been given positions of responsibility with good cause, and many of whom you get to know well and whose wisdom you can learn to trust. And the other assumption that people make is that the only way I can be guided is directly to me. That nobody else is ever going to get true guidance about me, only me. Although the chances of me getting true guidance about me are actually quite diminished because we're so engaged with our own realities. And that doesn't mean you go, take a vow of obedience to just anybody. But if you find yourself without sufficient, you feel you are insufficiently guided, then it behooves you to try to find people whose wisdom you can trust and whose experience you can trust. And bear in mind, it doesn't have to be, it's not mindless obedience. Just like, I was fortunate because I always say I grew up, but it was through my 20s at Ananda village. And I had friends who were more or less my peers, but we were all sincerely in this together. And so I could take my ideas to them, which I did constantly, and say, what do you think? Does this make any sense to you? Does this seem, like it might be a valid idea? Do you think this is a path I should follow? And I didn't have to do what they said, but I have to say that the feedback I got from my Guru Bhais was invaluable to me. And here we are. It's a question of you opening yourself to the resources that are available to you. Because there's a law of abundance, which is you have to be grateful for and make use of what you have before more is given to you. And if you reject what you have because it's not what you think you want, the chances are not good that you'll get more. Okay? Does that help?
It's one of the most brilliant 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, I'm glad, because it's a very real and important question. Many people tell me they've been able to tune into Swamiji more since he died than they could while he was living. Swamiji said, you all are lucky that you never knew Master in the body, and you would think that's the dopiest thing I ever heard. He said, because it was so confusing. You know, here, you know, he's the infinite spirit. He's in me all the time, and he's next door. He's writing letters, and he's going out to dinner. I mean, like, how do I put that together? He said, you all were never confused like that. Just interesting, you know, again, let's examine our ideas and not just flow with them. Okay? Certainly. Do we have another question? Well, that was a humdinger, so I guess that might be.
Is there anything online of yours? You can mention that if anybody's online, they can also.
If anybody's online, if there's any living humans on the side of the camera, and you have a question, you may write it into the chat box, right? Yeah.
Okay, I have one.
Okay, Duty.
I believe I heard Swamiji say that as far as free will goes,
Oh dear, the old free.
You know where this is going.
I know where this is going. Talk about the old free will question. Go ahead.
that you don't even really have a choice of which color tie you put on.
Yeah, you go to your closet and you pick out the tie according to predestination, which is an annoying concept. So that's the question? You know, I don't know why people are so interested in free will. I think free will is a horrible idea. But everybody's always really interested in it. I don't want to know that I have free will. I want to feel like God is in charge of my life. But people would come. I for the last more than 30 years, I've lived in Silicon Valley. And, you know, those are strong, independent-minded people. For the most part, it's just too darn expensive to live there unless you've got a lot of energy, much like perhaps Mumbai. Yeah. But people would come and, you know, we talk about guru, and I don't want a guru. I don't want to turn responsibility for my life over to someone. I'm in charge of my own destiny. I said, no such luck, you know. The master's not going to do it for you. It just... So here's how I feel like the question of free will is, it goes up into this big abstraction. And I know that for many people, the big abstraction is a very important question to answer. I've always been a very practical person. The question to me is like, what can I do about it? If I got some big story about what percentage is free will and what is this and that, would it make any difference? Because this is what I know. I make constant decisions about what to do. And I experience in an extremely direct way that what the decision I make in the morning affects the afternoon. The decision I make for a week is going to affect the week after. So there is no question in my mind that my willpower, my determination, the purity of my heart, the generosity of my heart has a huge effect on what happens next. And even if I can't get super theoretical about I was going to have to be generous, it doesn't feel like that. It feels to me like I have energy, and that energy has consequences. So who cares about the rest of it? I know a lot of people do care about the rest of it, and I'm not being disrespectful. It's just the way, you know, my particular mind works. But the other part of it is, look how interrelated everything is. I mean, you can't be here without there being, you know, millions of other things that had to happen for you to be sitting right here. I mean, just start with the pilot who flew the plane across, if you came from the US like I did, about the fact of, you know, whether you could make the turn because some big black car was there and it looked like it was never going to move. You know, what time did you get here? Why did your parents meet? Why did they decide to have a baby? You know, and what about their parents? Like, where are you going to cut the fabric of life and say this happens by free will independent of everything? It's just self-evident that it's all rolling together. And, you know, things happen to us from lifetimes we don't even remember. Karma comes due. And it just, Master said we make the mistake of thinking that because things follow one another sequentially in time, that one thing causes another. But it isn't. It's that the karma is coming due, and so circumstances come. And the karma coming due is that, you stole somebody's inheritance, or you ran away with somebody else's spouse, or this. One man asked me once, he had a very profoundly, a child that he was going to have to take care of well into adulthood. And, he just asked me, why do you think that happened? I said, and I knew him and I knew his personality. So I said, I don't know, maybe you abandoned your wife and ran away with your secretary and she raised your 6 children or something like that. You have a parenting debt that you have to pay. You have a health debt that you have to pay. Just all kinds of things. So where do you cut it? I got very interested in health when I was 18 years old. And I've had very good health. I tend, today notwithstanding. And it just crossed my mind very recently. Oh, heavens, I probably was sick for many incarnations. Which is why at the age of 18, I became very interested in health and diet and hydration, and all the things that you have to think about. And it just became obvious to me, of course. I broke the laws of health for many lifetimes. I suffered the consequences. And so now I don't break them as often. Just karma. What? Free will, karma. It was free will that caused me to break the laws, and it was free will that caused me to remember that it wasn't a good idea to do it, and I would someday get old and maybe it would matter. Where do you cut it? That's the question. If somebody can tell me where you cut it, then you'll talk about free will. Okay? Now, how it ends up that you pick a red tie instead of a blue one, I have no idea. But apparently, according to Swami, that's the way it is. Everything conspires. It's both very relaxing. Yeah, in a certain sense, it's very relaxing, because why do I rebel? Yeah. Yes, Abhirushi?
I have now questions on sort of the questions. I have 3 questions. First question is, can you talk a little bit about surrendering to God and Guru as a state? What does that look like and how does it feel?
Huh. Feels real good. Swami uses the word surrender, although at other times he's talked against the word surrender. Because surrender, I've been reading these novels about military things, of all things. I've never thought about it before, but I found this great author who writes history, but he writes it in a fiction way. Anyway, so I've been thinking about war and fighting. He says, the word surrender is when you've done everything you can and then they finally vanquish you and you have no choice and then, you surrender. It's not a very attractive concept. So even though I have to say in other contexts Swami has used it, sometimes he just says, we talk about surrender like we're beaten down and it's the only choice we have. The ego still wants to triumph, but it realizes it can't, so it surrenders. But that's not, it's not something you just lie awake and think how happy that would make me. What I think is more dynamic is the word acceptance. And I don't mean acceptance in a passive way, but it's accepting what is. And what is that we are tiny little creatures on this planet, and we are children of a great loving mother, father, God, and most of us are disciples of God-realized masters who can do so much for us if we just cooperate with them. And so then why would we not? We rebel, we argue, we want it to be different, but what do we know? I mean, this is, again, you have to actually ask the question, why do I think such and so would be a good idea? Well, because I like it. I want it. Ego wants easy and pleasurable. Soul wants freedom. Just ask yourself that question. Do I want to be comfortable or do I want to be free? And then to be free means that I want to accept what God has sent me, and I want to cooperate with what God is asking of me. You can also call that surrender, but I think those are more dynamic ways to think about it. That doesn't mean we can't be honest and say, whoa, this one looks like a terrible plan, sir. But there you have it. You wouldn't send it to me if there were... the way I think about it is, if there was an easier way for me to get free, God would have sent me by that route. Because he loves me, he doesn't hate me. But this is the only way home. So we have to go that way. Yeah.
Next question is, what is the thing you have been most surprised by about a life of discipleship?
What is the thing you've been most surprised about the life of discipleship? I wonder what the answer to that would be. How wonderful it is, perhaps. But that, I think I knew when I met Swamiji that I was really on to something. But I had no idea how magnificent this path is. I think that's the only words, because the longer I live it, the more astonishingly, awesomely magnificent it is. So that would be a surprise, because not a surprise in the sense that I didn't know it was possible, but a surprise in the sense that I was incapable of comprehending my good fortune. And every day is a bigger day than yesterday. Doesn't mean every day is happy or easy, but gratitude is different than that. Okay?
How to practice humor in day-to-day life to inculcate this habit?
There's no shortcut. I mean, that's a question. I'm not casting aspersions on whoever asked it. The question is how to practice this every day to...
Practice humor.
Oh, humor. Excuse me, I missed the question. Thank you. How to practice humor every day. Well, Master said read a funny story every day. Swamiji loved P.G. Woodhouse. He tried to get us good, clean, bright humor. I'll put it to you this way. When I cracked a rather cheeky joke to Swamiji once, millions of times, and once when I did, I got sort of scared, like, is this really what I should do? I said, sir, what is humor? Why did I give you such an answer instead of just answering it straight? He said, to a certain extent, humor is a spiritual quality, because in order to enjoy humor, to make humor, you have to be able to take a situation and see it differently. And that, just to be able to step outside of the obvious and see something that isn't obvious requires a certain flexibility and expansion of consciousness. So I think that would be how you would practice humor, is just don't always think of things as they are. And you have to also be childlike to enjoy humor, just to be... children don't have as many preconceptions. There was a little boy named Kabir. We found his name. He was about 2. He was on the plane that we were on. And I don't know, that little lad, he's definitely an emperor from some other incarnation. He just marched around the airport as if it was his airport. And you just seeing him, you just realize how free you can be. We don't have to play our roles so seriously. That's all I would say.
Actually, I have one.
Okay.
Maybe last
I was going to say, last one.
Ashaji, if our higher self knows everything, the way to live, what to do, then why do we really incarnate? Because our higher self knows everything.
Because the lower self doesn't.
So what does it matter? Why do we need to have a lower self when we, eventually merge with the higher self?
The question is, if the higher self has all wisdom and knowledge already, why do we have to incarnate? that is the question as to why God did it. And Vivekananda's brilliant answer to that was, the level of consciousness that asks the question is not capable of comprehending the answer. Because you would have to have the perspective on the creation that the divine has, and by definition, I mean, you know and I know, I don't, and you don't, I can't see it as God sees it. Apparently, they all tell us that if we can see it the way God sees us, it all makes perfect sense. And that is just an article of faith, that you just have to do that. Now, once again, I get real practical with this. I'm in prison, and that's a prison of my own consciousness. I might not be guilty of the crime. You know, I might be here by bigoted, prejudiced attorneys who put me in prison, but I'm in prison, and I don't like it. So how I got here and why I got here doesn't matter as much as what do I do to get out. And I've certainly found the longer I'm on the path and the more I keep trying and the happier I get, the more fair it seems. So we have to also be practical in the questions we ask, and we also have to say, well, I remember Shivani went into seclusion, Shivani not from Mumbai, Shivani from Assisi. And she came out of seclusion, she walked up to Swamiji just with this fierce energy she has. She just looked him in the face and said, why? You know, and it was that question. And Swami just looked at her, I sort of leaned over because she's short, you know, he kind of leaned over. And he said, Shivani, what difference would it make? Meaning the problem is still the same. So the question actually becomes, how motivated am I to escape from this prison? And what difference would it make if I knew why he did it? Again, you know, it's like questions will spin, and sometimes our mind persuades us that if I had the answer to this question, then I would get to work. But you have to also ask yourself the question as to whether or not I'm just avoiding the work by demanding the answer to the question. Be practical in your idealism, that's how Master put it. Okay. And when you find out, let me know. I think, my friends, that is enough. Do we have? Oh, yeah, or a chant? Let's do a chant.
Let's do a chant.
Let's do one more chant.
Can I get that?
Yes, you may. The black one.
Black one, yes.
There you have it. Guitar's over there.
Yeah, I'll get it.
Thank you all very much. Very nice of you.
You didn't mention that you went and saw the Worley Center and...
Oh, yes, I did. I went and saw the Worley Center. And it's going to be fun. It is really going to be fun. Congratulations.
Listen, it's nice. Taking something else.
Yeah, something is missing.
Okay. I don't know.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
friend, beloved God,
and beloved God,
great masters,
great masters,
dear friend Swamiji,
dear friend Swamiji,
may thy love shine forever
may thy love shine forever
on the sanctuary of our devotion,
on the sanctuary of our devotion,
and may we be able
and may we be
to
able
awaken thy love
to awaken thy love
in all hearts.
in all hearts.
Om.